In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the EufyMake E1 rotary attachment, and I'll walk you guys through a bunch of examples. I'll even show you guys a few tips and tricks for processing workpieces that technically aren't supposed to be compatible. And if you haven't seen my original video on the EufyMake E1 UV ink printer, I'll put a link to that in the top right hand corner of the screen right now. And in that video, I ran through the basics of using this printer in flat mode, and since then I've produced a lot of interesting results for a variety of different projects in different videos, so go check those out. UV ink printing on mugs, tumblers, water bottles, and more is an amazing way to take your customization to a whole new level, whether it's for personal or business use, and printing in full color and with texture unlocks new realms of creativity beyond what you can do with just laser engraving. So if you're looking for the E1 or anything else that you've seen in this video, use the links in the video description down below. It goes a long way to supporting this channel and it will cost you nothing extra. Let's get started. In my first video, I already unboxed the E1 printer itself, so in this video, we're only going to focus on the rotary attachment. And in this box, you'll find a user manual. You'll also find some accessories. We'll get to these in a moment and I'll show you how to use each one of them, but essentially you got these little tiny accessories and a holder for them. And then finally inside of the box we have the rotary module itself, and this thing is pretty remarkable and highly functional, and we'll get into setting it up right now. So first we'll go ahead and remove the mini flatbed by releasing it using the locking tab on the front. Then we can swap in the rotary module, and you'll see on the front of the rotary module there's a cutout for that same locking tab. And on the bottom, you may have noticed the electrical contacts. Those will face the left-hand side of the machine, so we can just set the whole thing inside of the E1 and then lock it in place. Now, EufyMake will be making available a bunch of consumables, including things like tumblers, water bottles, as well as mugs and more. They sent me a bunch of samples, and you may notice here that all of them are white, and this is going to be ideal to print on. However, later in the video, I'm going to grab some bottles and tumblers that I have from my own collection that are darker colors, and we're going to try and print on those to check the color and print quality. I'll also walk you guys through examples with the larger 40-ounce tumblers and some workpieces with handles, so stick with me here. So first, let's take a look at the rotary module itself. Now, on the left-hand side, we've got these wheels that have a rubber or silicone-like surface, and those are going to grip the edges of your round workpieces, and these are the drive wheels. So this is what's going to spin the workpieces around. You'll always be setting up your bottles or tumblers with the open side facing the left, so facing those drive wheels. Now, if you need some extra grip, this is where the accessories come into play, and there are these extensions for the drive wheels, and they're magnetic. They have little locating tabs on the inside so that they spin with the drive wheels, and you can just stick them on. Again, they're magnetic, so you can also just pull them off very easily. Now, up at the top, there is this wheel here, and this is going to apply downward pressure to the inside of your tumbler or mug. The downward pressure is going to ensure that the mug or tumbler always stays in contact with the drive wheels, and if the inside lip or edge of your mug or tumbler has a thread or something in the way and you need to reach inside further, you can use that accessory that I just showed you to thread it on and get a longer reach inside of your workpiece. On the right hand side of the rotary attachment, we got this spring-loaded bumper, and the back face of your mug or tumbler is going to come into contact with that, and it's going to roll against that little bumper. On either side of that spring-loaded end stop bumper, we've got these smooth idler wheels, and the accessory bag also came with some extensions for those idler wheels as well, and they are also magnetic. The bottom edge of your tumbler will ride on those idler wheels, and the whole thing is adjustable back and forth. You should be pressing that green button to release it, and you can slide the idler wheels to fit the length of your workpiece. So we'll do an example here with one of these EufyMake tumblers. I'll position the open mouth of the tumbler on the left-hand side. I'll set it down on top of those drive wheels, and then I'll adjust the slide at the back. So you'll see that spring-loaded end stop idler will come into contact with the bottom of the tumbler, and the rest of the thing rides on the idler wheels. And now we can engage the tensioner, and it's on a sort of rocker-like mechanism. So you push down and then push to the right to force it inside of the tumbler, and it's spring-loaded, so it will just apply a constant pressure to the inside face of the tumbler. And for this example, I felt like I needed the extensions on those idler wheels at the back, so I went ahead and just magnetically stuck those on. Now inside of EufyMake Studio, we're going to need to ensure that we're in the rotary print bed option. Make sure you're not in the flat option, and you'll see that your workspace should look something like this with these dashed lines. If you hover over the little button that says how to align in the top right hand corner, it's going to show you how the surface of your tumbler is unfolded, and the representation of that unfolded surface is laid out right in front of you, with the middle dashed line being the middle of the tumbler when it's facing up. Now, if you check off with handle, you're going to see that there are some no-go zones on the left and right hand side that are areas close to the handle where the printer will not be able to print. In this first example, I don't have a handle, so I'll uncheck that option and then I'll just click on Auto Measure. And before proceeding to the auto measure, you can select between two profiles of the tumblers, the first being a regular cylinder, the other one being tapered with the bottom end of the tumbler smaller than the top end, and here you also have the option of selecting the checkbox with handle. Now there was a third option where the top of the object was smaller than the bottom, call it a reverse taper, but this one was unsupported. But keep watching because I've got an example like that coming up and we'll make it work. But for this first example, we're keeping it very simple with this straight cylinder. And you can see the object being measured right now, so the dual laser system is taking a look at the size and profile of this tumbler, and it's going to make any adjustments necessary to make sure that the top surface is parallel with the print head. For tapered objects, this entire rotary attachment can tilt pretty drastically, and we're going to see that a little bit later, but for now, we do not need to tilt this object at all. Back in EufyMake Studio on the right hand side, you can see all of the dimensions of the tumbler were brought in, and I've also imported a graphic. Now I've set this graphic up to be a full wrap around the entire tumbler. So I designed the height of the graphic to match the tumbler, and then of course the width was just the diameter of the tumbler times pi. And it looks like I did my math correctly because the width of the graphic matches the width of the workspace, which, if you recall, I just explained was the surface of the tumbler unfolded. When you select the graphic in EufyMake Studio, you can change the ink mode, and in this case we've already got a white tumbler, so I'm just going to select CMYK so it doesn't need to lay down a white layer first. And also with the image selected, you can see that there are position options. So you can adjust the XY position or the top or bottom margin. And in this case, I've set the graphic down using the top margin just a bit so that it does not get printed on the bare stainless steel lip on the top of one of these tumblers. And that is all we need to do. So I'll send this graphic off to be printed, and you can see here that I've got the front and rear cover of the E1 open. With the rotary attachment, the covers will close, and I would recommend keeping them closed to limit your exposure to that UV light. Of course, I've left mine open for filming purposes, but if you have them open, be sure to wear those safety glasses. After a few minutes, this job was done, and we can take a close look at the quality. Now keep in mind, I did not select the raised print. This is a flat print, and I purposely created a gradient from black to a very light color, such as yellow with green in between. The rest of the image was transparent, so it didn't print anything on top of those white surfaces, and I was impressed with the color accuracy, and the pattern was completely continuous, so the measurements worked out perfect, and the tumbler did not slip on those rollers. Next, we're going to tackle these cylindrical mugs, and these ones have a handle. And this is again one of these EufyMake products. So you'll notice that the surface is white and it should be ideal for printing on. As with the previous example, we'll set this thing up with the open end of the mug facing the left-hand side of the machine. The top edge of the mug will sit on the driven rollers on the left-hand side, and then we can slide the entire idler end of the rotary attachment to the bottom of the mug. And when you have a workpiece with a handle, the handle should be facing straight down. Within EufyMake Studio, we'll select the box that says with handle, and here you'll see the non-printing area show up, and if you hover over the button in the top right-hand corner saying how to align, it will indicate, as I just previously said, that the handle should be facing straight down. Then we can select auto measure, and as we had seen when I'd set this thing up, this mug has a handle, but it's also a straight cylinder with no tapered faces. So we'll go ahead and select that, and then we'll have the auto measure completed. And I really love watching this process as the machine does this kind of robotic dance where it's bouncing up and down and moving back and forth, and the lasers are moving across the surface, measuring out the workpiece. And the best part is that it's not just theater, because on the right hand side, after the auto measure is done, the measurements of this mug are pretty accurate. and then we can go ahead and import our graphic. And you can see that I have my graphic centered, it's not in the non-printing area, and I can use the button in the bottom right hand corner, preview. And because of the options we selected where it's got a handle, the preview window will give us a 3D representation of our mug and the placement of our graphic on that surface. Now if I move the graphic into the non-printing area and I click preview, you can see that a part of the graphic is cut off. So the printer will likely refuse to print in this area because it will not want to rotate the mug up, that it will risk contacting the print head with that handle. Now if you're looking to get a graphic closer to the handle, I don't have a solution for that with the rotary attachment. However, EufyMake does offer a laminating machine. I'm going to cover that in the third video of this EufyMake E1 series, and that accessory can be used to make transfer stickers, and of course you can put stickers anywhere you want. And so if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss that next video. Now for this example, I'm going to change the craft mode from flat to flat raised. I selected a 0.2mm raised height, so it's quite low, but it still will be much thicker than just the flat option, and we'll see that when it's done. And you may not have been able to tell when we were in Design Studio, but the fill of this text is actually just transparent, so it's not white. So you get a really cool effect when you select the raised option here, as the text will appear white because it's just the surface of the mug, and the text will feel like it's been debossed into that graphic. If instead of making the center of that text transparent, if I just filled it with white inside of, let's say, Photoshop, it's my understanding that the printer would just build that area up with white ink and you wouldn't get that 3D text effect. So if you're designing your own graphics, get creative with the use of transparency. And on the subject of transparency, I've got this glass cappuccino cup next. And you'll notice that the shape is the non-supported shape where the open end of the mug is smaller than the base. Now, even though it says this shape is not supported, I'm going to take a small risk here for you guys, as I think we can trick the machine into getting this to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the glass on the left-hand side as I normally would, but on the right-hand side, I'm going to pull the slide over to the right a little bit. And what I'm attempting to do here is get the top surface of the glass parallel with the print head. And this particular glass has a pretty generous radius on the bottom. So by using those idler extensions and moving that slide to the right, we're dropping the right-hand side of the glass. Now this is potentially slightly unstable, and this is where the risk comes into play because the glass could slip or it could completely fall out, but we're gonna see how it goes. In EufyMake Studio, we're going to use the auto measure feature and we're going to select the cylindrical shape. And the reason for selecting cylindrical shape is that I don't want the rotary attachment to attempt to tilt. And if you haven't noticed already, the rotary attachment only tilts up on the right-hand side. And that's exactly why the inverted taper shape wouldn't be supported. In order to get that surface parallel with the print head, you would have to bring the right-hand side of the workpiece downwards. And that's basically what I did by just moving the slide slightly over to the right-hand side and let those idler wheels ride farther down on the bottom radius of that glass. Now, despite this mounting setup not being super secure, during the printing process, the print head doesn't actually physically touch the workpiece. It just sort of seems to spray the ink onto the workpiece from a distance. So it's not really imparting a lot of force, and I really don't think that the cup is going to fall off, but we're gonna find out. Within EufyMake Studio, I'll import the next graphic and I'll just perform some basic functions. So I'm going to resize the graphic and I'm going to center it, and then I'm going to settle on my top margin. And whenever you're setting up a job, be sure to take measurements beforehand so you get some sense of the placement and size of the graphic that you want on the workpiece. Preparation goes a long way. Now in this case, I also select the material as glass because this is a glass cappuccino cup, and I used the white to CMYK flat printing mode. And you can see the final result here, where I thought that the thickness of the white layer was insufficient for printing on glass. The graphic is still partially transparent and you can see a lot of light bleed through. And even looking at it from the backside, I'm not even really getting a sense that there was a thick white layer laid down in the first place. The printer must be printing something very, very thin. So what I did was I tried the process again, but this time I used the flat raised option and I only raised it 0.1 millimeters. But as you can see, that additional thickness went a long way into making the graphic a lot more opaque and the colors more vibrant. So if you're printing on glass, I would recommend using the flat raised option. Even if you're only selecting the lowest setting of 0.1 millimeters, it makes a big difference. Next, we're going to move on to some workpieces that aren't white and aren't clear. In this case, I've got this small purple YETI. And you may have noticed in previous examples that I've always been cleaning these workpieces with some alcohol pads before printing on them. And this is to remove any sort of finger oils or any contaminants that may prevent the UV ink from sticking properly. And this purple YETI is going to be an example where the inside edge of the tumbler or mug has a large and long thread on it. And so I'm going to use this extension attachment for the spring-loaded tensioner so that when we go to set this thing up, the tensioner can reach further inside of the YETI tumbler and it's not going to roll on those threads. Having that tensioner rolling on the threads could lead to some unwanted vibrations or movements, and of course that will mess up the print job. Other than that, there's not a whole lot else we need to consider for this particular job. I'll just hit the auto measure button and you can see that this YETI is a straight walled cylinder. And then I'll import my graphic, and I had designed this specifically for this water bottle in mind, and you can see that I've created a halftone fade effect on the top, bottom, left, and right edges. And that halftone fade is not into white, it's transparent. And so what I was trying to do here was when the graphic wraps completely around the tumbler where the two edges would normally meet, we'll get this fade effect, and hopefully it will reduce the harsh appearance of where the graphic would normally just abruptly start and finish. Now, if you attempt something like this for yourself, just keep in mind that all of those little circles in that fade will fade into the background color, which is going to be the color of the tumbler itself. So in this case, purple. And in this screen capture here, you'll see that I've went ahead and processed this job with just the craft mode as flat and the ink mode as white to CMYK. But as we'll see in a moment, I ended up botching this job slightly because the original print in this particular mode did not come out to my satisfaction. As I'd shown with the glass cappuccino cup, the amount of white ink as the base layer just isn't enough on these dark surfaces, and the original print came out looking very dull and dark. So in an attempt to fix that, I ended up printing on top of that using the flat raised option, and I only selected 0.1 millimeters, the same as the cappuccino glass. But my problem was that I didn't line the tumbler up in the exact same orientation as I did with the first print. And so if you look close enough, you'll notice that the two graphics are unfortunately misaligned. But the silver lining to this is that I did figure out that using the raised option is much better for darker colored workpieces. And the other super cool thing is that if you use a halftone transparent fade and you use the raised option, the halftone faded area creates a texture that's perfect for gripping these things with your hands. So again, if you get creative with transparency and you use that flat raised option, you can create amazing custom tactile surfaces. Next, I want to talk about these very large and popular 40-ounce tumblers, and you can see that I've got one here in black and it has a removable handle. Now the problem with this one is that it is too long to fit inside of the rotary attachment. I've got a few of these from different sources and they're generally the same size, however there are some minor differences in dimensions, and this is the longest of the bunch. And it just doesn't matter how hard I try, it's not going to fit inside of the rotary attachment, and trust me, I've tried just about everything. I even went as far as trying to remove the little spring-loaded end stop idler. It's held in place with a small socket head screw and nut, but still, to my disappointment, the edge of the tumbler now rests on this bar, which is very difficult to remove because it's inside of the actual rotary attachment itself, and the tumbler will not properly ride on those idler wheels. So that doesn't work. Additionally, even if you find one of these 40-ounce tumblers that's ever so slightly shorter, like this one here that I'd previously laser engraved, and it does fit into the rotary attachment, at least lengthwise, you may run into a few more issues. And one of those is that the handle might be so large that it won't rotate and it does hit the rotary attachment. Then hopefully you have the variety with a removable handle. So this one here has 2 screws at the bottom. But the final challenge is that the shape of the tumbler itself is not going to make the auto measure very happy, at least not from my experience. So you'll see that it tries to tilt the whole tumbler up very high, and I think it's because it's trying to compensate for the much smaller surface at the bottom of this tumbler. Now obviously we can't print like that, so what I did was I 3D printed these rings The ring has an inner surface that's tapered to match the bottom of the tumbler, and it press fits onto the bottom, and you'll notice that it sits a few millimeters off the bottom so that on this very long tumbler, we're going to get it to fit properly onto the rotary attachment. The ring will engage with the end stop and it will ride on those idler bearings, and the outer diameter of the ring is the same measurement as the top of the tumbler. So it should trick the auto measure into thinking that this is going to be one continuous surface and it won't tilt. Now, obviously, we're only going to be able to print on the top portion of this tumbler, the largest surface there, because the smallest portion where it drops down is just going to be too far away from the print head when we're printing. So you'll have to design your graphic accordingly, but at least we can get this thing to fit, and you'll see once I have it in the rotary attachment, I set it up like any other workpiece with a handle, with that handle facing straight down. And taking a closer look at the bottom of the workpiece, one key detail to pay attention to is to just make sure that the bottom of the tumbler does not contact the frame of the rotary attachment. The ring engages with the end stop and helps the whole thing fit lengthwise, but hopefully you don't have too much of the tumbler still sticking out where it's going to come into contact with this black plastic frame. And you can see that I was sliding a piece of paper in between the two just to demonstrate that there is in fact a gap. Now in EufyMake Studio, the setup's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to select the option with a handle, and we go to auto measure. I'm going to select the straight cylinder with a handle, and the E1's dual laser measurement system should pick up on that ring and then not tilt this workpiece. Whether or not it sees that smaller diameter section, it just knows that it cannot tilt this thing because otherwise it would force the ring up into the print head and then it would crash. So it's forced to leave it perfectly straight, and that's going to be perfect for us to print on the larger portion of this 40-ounce tumbler. If you don't have a 3D printer, I'm going to make a set of these rings available on my website, embracemaking.com. The set will come with 3 different size rings, and the reason for 3 rings is to try and accommodate the slight differences between different manufacturers of these 40-ounce tumblers as well as 30-ounce tumblers of a similar profile. Now back in EufyMake Studio, after the auto measure is complete, I'm going to import my graphic, and I'm going to resize it and place it according to the location of the top portion of that tumbler. So you can see the printing area that's laid out is the overall height of the entire tumbler. So there's a bottom section there that's not going to be usable. Obviously, EufyMake Studio is not going to outline that for you, so you're going to have to take your own measurements beforehand. For this job, because we're using a black tumbler, I'm going to go back to selecting the flat raised mode, only a thickness of 0.1 millimeters, and I'm also going to select the material as metal. I actually had a conversation with EufyMake's support team about trying to get more vibrant colors on darker surfaces, and they said that by selecting the metal material, it should lay down extra layers of white ink. So depending on the material that you do select in that drop-down menu, it apparently will result in a different printing process. So I was hoping that combined with the flat raised option would give me the optimal result. And I do think that it did make a slight difference, although I thought the colors could be still a little brighter and more vibrant. I, again, in this example, went with a halftone feature on the top left and bottom right corners of the graphic just to kind of mix things up and experiment. Those printed just fine, but my main concern again was the colors. So I reached out to EufyMake support one more time, and they were very happy to get this feedback. And one of the things that they shared with me was that in future versions of EufyMake Studio, there is going to be an option where you can actually manually select how many white layers go underneath of your graphic. At the time of this video, that option hasn't appeared yet, and the printer is still actually in the Kickstarter phase right now. But having the opportunity to be an early tester of this machine, I'm hoping that my feedback will result in a better user experience for you guys once the machines ship out and you get yours. And if you haven't purchased one yet, and you guys are really enjoying my in-depth and thorough videos, please consider using my affiliate links in the video description down below. Pick up a EufyMake E1 for yourself or for your business using the link below. It's not going to cost you anything extra, and it goes a long way to help supporting this channel. So that's it for this video. I really love using this rotary attachment to elevate my tumblers and mugs to a whole new level. And all of these pieces have been through the dishwasher several times now, with the exception of these glass cups, because the packaging did say that they are hand wash only, but these have also been hand washed several times now, and I use them regularly. And there's no signs of the UV ink degrading or chipping away at this point. I think the key to longevity in these pieces is the preparation of the surface before putting them in the E1. So as you guys saw in this video, I was always wiping them down with alcohol wipes before processing them. But I also think that just inherently, the process of the UV ink curing on the surface results in a very durable coating. So I hope that these will stand the test of time. Thank you guys so much for watching right to the end of this video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next video in the EufyMake E1 series, where I'll be testing out the laminating machine attachment.